Thank you everyone for attending Diamond IT's virtual webinar, Cybersecurity and Insurance Strategies to Protect Your Firm. My name is Sam Cordell and I'm the Marketing Manager for Diamond IT and your host for today's webinar. With the increasing trend of law firms being targeted by sophisticated cyber attacks, we could talk to you about this topic all day. But for now, we're going to cover the fundamentals, starting with the current cyber threats targeting the legal industry and how to best prepare and protect your firm and to respond if you do happen to fall victim. Our panel today will cover legal responsibilities, ironically, around protecting client data and responding to breaches. They will address how focusing on a culture of cyber awareness can help mitigate risk and how to establish a robust disaster recovery plan and also why they are so important. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle, how cyber insurance can add an additional layer of protection for the modern workforce. With that said, let me begin by introducing our panel. We are very excited to have such an amazing caliber today with us, starting with Diamond IT's Business Technology Consulting Manager, Glendin Franklin-Browne. With a diverse career in the technology industry spanning more than 25 years, Glendin is a practical cybersecurity specialist who is passionate about partnering with businesses to elevate their technology and cybersecurity strategy. We also have Gallagher Australia's National Practice Leader for Cyber Technology, Robyn Adcock. Robyn brings more than 20 years of experience in professional and financial risk management in the Australian market and specialises in educating businesses on the importance of their cyber threats. Also joining today is Melissa Burrows, the Operations Manager of Turnbull Hill Lawyers. Melissa has over 27 years experience in the legal industry and is passionate about creating the new efficiencies in these times of fast-paced technological advancement. Well, I must say I am impressed. Welcome, guys, and let's get started. So all reports show that 2020 was a record year of data breaches globally, and I don't think that is a great surprise to anyone. What is surprising are the numbers. 30 billion records were compromised, which was more than the previous 15 years combined. So Glendin, a question for you. What does this mean for organisations in Australia and more specifically the legal sector?
Thanks, Sam. Yes, unfortunately 2020 did provide a unique opportunity for cybercrime to flourish, particularly with the shift to working from home for most organisations. Now, unfortunately, this trend hasn't slowed down, and we're seeing reports that 40% of small businesses have experienced at least one serious cyber incident in the past 12 months. And that's not even counting the organisations that don't report their cyber-related incidents. Specifically for the legal sector, that statistic equates to 1 in 5 firms.
Well, so Glenn, why are law firms particularly a prime target? Can you talk us through that?
Sure. Law firms tend to be target for attack for a few reasons. Firstly, due to the sheer volume of confidential, personally identifiable information they store and how valuable this information is to cyber criminals. Secondly, because of the types of transactions law firms participate in, such as property settlements and high-value money transfers. The threat landscape for law firms and businesses more generally has increased as more and more of our daily life and work is conducted online. And finally, cyber risk increases again with firms offering flexible working arrangements such as working from home. This moves human targets from an environment protected by sophisticated cybersecurity technology to a less secure environment at home with minimal cybersecurity protections in place.
Okay, well, it's easy to see why hackers are keen to target this industry, that's for sure. So look, I'm sure there's a long list, but can you share some common examples of attacks that law firms have been experiencing?
Sure. Well, particularly we've seen a surge in email fraud targeting law firms, which can result in invoice scams or data theft via email hijacking. I came across an interesting example of an email compromise recently where a legal secretary had their credentials stolen. Basically, their online work email account was being accessed by a cyber criminal for over 2 months. During that time, the cyber criminal set up a rule which sent all inbound and outbound emails to an external Gmail account. Literally thousands of emails were stolen using this method before the breach was identified and stopped. When we looked into it a little further, we found that some of the emails stolen included client information such as copies of driver's licenses, passports and birth certificates, as well as lots of other sensitive information. Now, although the damage this data breach caused will never fully be quantified, it not only had an impact on the reputation of the firm, but the large number of clients it impacted. Some other areas we're seeing social engineering attacks in areas such as phishing and email and spear phishing attacks. These attacks trick a user into clicking on a malicious link or downloading malicious software, allowing the cyber criminal to access the firm's information systems. This can in turn lead to confidential information and personal information being stolen and sold on the dark web. Then we have much more malicious attacks such as malware or ransomware. Those attacks are designed to cause significant damage to firms' information systems. Now, this includes downtime, with the best case being system-wide outages for a few days, taking a few days to recover, and for unprepared organisations, the worst case being weeks, months, or never fully recovering. That, coupled with the significant loss of revenue, cost of restoration, and loss of client confidence, let alone the potential of having to pay the ransom fee, makes these types of attacks in particular the most destructive.
Wow, so thank you, Glendin. Look, I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg, no doubt. I'm going to circle back to these points and what firms can do to prepare and protect themselves. But first, I want to share some more examples. Just want to check if Robyn is on the line. We did have some technical issues.
Hi, Samantha. I'm on the line.
Fantastic. Great. Good to have you, Robyn. So Robyn, this question is for you. So Gallagher Australia is a leading cyber insurance organisation with no doubt a lot of exposure to activity in this area. What are you seeing in this space? And do you think there is still an element of this won't happen to my firm?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. There has been some technical issues, which probably suggests the whole concept of why this webinar is quite good today, because things can just go wrong, and there's so much, cyber incidents across the world right now, which are quite concerning. So these stats, as up on the screen, are showing you that claims against law firms between 2019 and 2021 are quite rampant at the moment. And so you can see from these statistics that in this period of time, business email compromise was probably the highest level of risk that we saw for law firms, and ransomware was at 17.4%. But as you know, ransomware across the world has caused great concern across industry, and particularly to law firms, because law firms are an incredible target for cyber criminals because of the highly sensitive information that you all hold. And whether that's like family law, criminal law, litigation, holding data for royal commissions, real estate, tax file numbers, professional law firms are very high targets. And it's demonstrated within these statistics that are taken from one of the largest, or actually the largest, incident response firms in the country that have run 2,000 claims over the last 3 years. So if we now move to the next slide. So here you can see that in 2021, now ransomware has become the biggest risk in line with business email compromise. And so that statistic is slowly but surely moving up across all professional services firms, but in particular, again, law firms are a large target, because particularly for, the small to mid-sized law firms where security has probably been somewhere on the agenda, but potentially not front of mind, which really goes to the next slide. If we go to the next slide, you can see that small to medium businesses are 87% of the claims of these statistics, which is incredible. And I guess to Sam's point, there's definitely a concept of it still won't happen to me, but I actually think that thought process is really moving strongly along the agenda as the government, the Australian government with their security strategy back in August 2020, which is now, parliamentary bills that are talking about critical infrastructure, imposed security, supply chain entering into that critical infrastructure, imposed security. Everyone is moving this conversation up on the agenda, and law firms really need to do the same thing, and particularly because they are such huge targets because of the sensitivity of the information they have, and also because of their dependence, that we'll get to a little bit later, on the kind of platforms, again, across industry, that people have developed what they consider to be efficiencies in their business are actually now becoming one of the biggest risks of their business.
Yeah. That's right, Robyn. Thank you. It is certainly something for firms, regardless of size, to think about. And as you said, that movement is pretty scary. So, look, what I'd like to do now is turn to a real life example. Thank you, Melissa, for coming on again today and for sharing Turnbull Hill's experience with cyber attacks. Tell us a little bit about these attacks and what that meant for your firm, and also what changes did this experience lead to?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. At Turnbull Hill Lawyers, we have had a couple of cyber attacks. Thankfully, they were back in 2016, so over 5 years ago now, and the systems and processes that we've put in place since then have ensured that we've stayed protected, which is great. But
that is good.
But in April 2016, we did suffer a brute force crypto attack. It was targeted at one of our servers, which is our terminal server that we use for remote access, mainly for staff working from home. Access was via a legacy non-active user account, one that had been created by previous IT managers and we weren't even aware was still hanging around in the system. It had a weak password attached to it called password 1. It also had elevated logon privileges, which allowed the brute force attack to get into our system. We noticed the attack because our precedent coordinator had been working on our precedents in the back end of the system in File Explorer, and she actually noticed the crypto virus start running down the files and realised something was really wrong. Rang us in a panic, we ran Diamond IT in a panic, and they started to jump into action to help get on top of things for us. So Diamond went about trying to use a ransom recovery tool that, if it had been successful, would have meant that they would have been able to target the encrypted files, but it unfortunately didn't work as they were hoping it would, and we ended up in a full server outage. So we ended up with having to rebuild our server, and this had to take place overnight and meant that during the whole attack we were out for about a day and a half, and we were locked out of all of our systems. The actions that we took after that to stop that from ever happening again was to audit all of our user accounts and passwords. So that was one that we weren't aware of, was sitting in the back end. We audited the rest of our user accounts and made sure to tighten up the security there. We also tightened up the security on the terminal server. So we made sure that when users were logging in remotely, they had to sign in via VPN first and then using their Office 365 credentials as a double layer of security. We also installed a new microserver, and this, in addition to the servers that we already had, allowed Diamond on our behalf to set up 2 domain controllers. So if we ever experience another cyber attack again of that sort, Diamond will be able to restore one of the Diamond controllers, and staff will be able to continue then to work. So while we may not be able to access some of the files that might get encrypted, we would be able to access other systems. For example, being able to use the internet, being able to use our document management system, email, etc., which we had been locked out of previously. Also, the microserver allows for a much faster restore from backup, so we should be able to be back up and running within a couple of hours instead of closer to a couple of days. The last thing we did as well was just to improve our firewall infrastructure. The second attack we had was actually only a few months later, in August 2016. It was a bit of a tough year. It was via our Samsung telephone system and the PABX, so a little bit of a different type of attack. The telco provider that we had at the time contacted us and advised us of fraudulent activity going on in our account. And essentially the hackers had probably got into the system using a generic passcode that had been set against the voicemails of 4 zeros. They then used those voicemail lines to make thousands of dollars worth of outbound international calls to places like Monaco and Kosovo. The system was set up to bar international calls, but unfortunately an error had been made and the barring was set to 001 calls instead of 0011 calls. And so that's why the hackers were able to make those international calls. The action we took after that attack was for basically to make some changes to the PABX system. We made sure that all outbound international calls were barred unless we wanted specific users to have access. So we allowed access to the partners, to various managers and lawyers that might have overseas clients as well. We also barred the voicemail ports from being able to make external calls. The passcode on the voicemail systems was also changed. Instead of everyone having a generic one, we made sure that each user had their own individual passcode. So I guess the lessons learned from both of these scenarios that we went through in 2016 is how important secure passwords are, no matter what the system. I think we can potentially be lured into thinking, oh, you know, no one's going to get in via that way. It'll just be easier if we use this generic password.
That's right.
But it can be a gateway to other areas of your system that you may not be aware of. Also, having the right infrastructure in place and a disaster recovery plan. So now with all of that extra infrastructure that I mentioned we've put in place, we know that we can be back on our feet in a couple of hours if anything like this ever happened again. I think the other important thing we learned was auditing of systems and making sure that if there's those little errors like just missing a zero in those international barring calls and things like that, auditing your systems regularly, having your IT provider help you do that, I think can protect against these types of things. And lastly, in relation to your phone system, whether you have an old PABX system or whether you are now in a cloud-based system like we are, making sure that you have proper protections against your international calls.
Great, thank you, Melissa. They're awesome tips. And thank you again for sharing your experience.
You're
yes,
welcome.
while it was a hard lesson learned, it does sound like you're quite secure now, which is great.
That's right.
So, Robyn, back to you. You mentioned earlier about some of the common themes coming through in claims in the legal sector. Are you able to share some examples with us?
Yeah, so this slide is basically a real life claim experience, and this is the sort of thing that's happening now all the time. And so it's unfortunate that all that happened to Melissa in 2016, but essentially they're now ready for what is a 2021 attack, more so probably than most people that haven't suffered something and put that focus on increasing their cybersecurity and increasing their cyber resilience. So this is an example of what's going on all the time now. So the client discovered that they've lost access to the systems, they've identified there's an encryption or ransomware event, and that can be as simple as someone having clicked on a phishing email, put in a password, basically been tricked into giving a password, and then, the criminal accessing the system. And obviously Glendin can talk to all of this in a far more technical way, but essentially it just means it's tools down and nobody can access systems, or, systems start to go slow and there's an incredible disruption. And then someone somewhere sees a notice on their computer saying, okay, we've encrypted your systems and now you need to pay us $1 million in order for us to unlock your systems. And it sounds all kind of sci-fi, but this is actually happening all the time now. We're seeing these claims, on a very regular basis. So the original demand was for $1 million, and then, within an insurance policy, which I'll talk about later, but essentially you have every kind of service you need to help you go through what is a deer in headlights kind of situation. I see so many clients just ringing up going, we can't access, we can't do, we can't move. So this claim was, they negotiated the ransomware down to $535,000, and in the same time you have forensics that have to come along and make sure that the criminal's out of your system, the system's being remediated, they're not coming back, and you've also got to have identified, and again, Glendin can speak to what, current situation is it's now not just a target against one computer system, one company in that structured perimeter. It's actually now coming from a place where the criminals come in, they take the data, then they come back and they say, we've got the data, we're going to publish it, we're holding you to ransom, and we're encrypting your systems. So it's kind of like a double extortion.
Double whammy.
Double whammy through.
Okay, great. Thank you for that example. Yeah, I know. I think we had another one from you as well around supply chain risk.
Yeah, so what's happening also is what we've seen is that law firms in particular have been, impacted by, again, third-party platforms. So all businesses, including us, have done the right thing by saying, you know what, we've got some inefficiencies in our business, so let's get real professional outsourced providers to deal with this part of our business, like our, payroll or e-discovery kind of tools, those sorts of things, particularly for law firms. And so what happens is you can't actually contract out of your own liability. So you do something that you think is safe, but the third party gets attacked, and then it's your data that's impacted. So we've seen a lot of claims arising out of the Australian and the Law and Order attack, and more recently the Microsoft Exchange server, where there were vulnerabilities picked up in what were legacy systems. So again, the insurance market is reacting very strongly to companies that have legacy systems or have not audited their supply chain. So these are new risks that are evolving kind of like every day, and the market is responding every day, and the government is responding every day to all of these new risks.
Wow, so fast-paced, it's tough to keep up. Thank you so much, Robyn. I think this is probably a good time now to talk about how firms can prepare and protect themselves to minimise some of this risk, and I guess to also how to respond if there is an unfortunate attack. So firstly, let's touch on an important point, that is the requirements around protecting client data and responding to the breaches. Glendin, can you share some insights with us on how a firm can be harmed if it's not upheld, or how firms can better educate themselves on understanding the ever-changing regulations in this area?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Anne. That's a really important question, and I'll also touch on something that Robyn spoke about as well, as looking at that supply chain and making sure your third-party providers are protecting your data as well, because that's a really good point to make. Look, this is something we address with our customers all the time. If a firm should find themselves in the unfortunate situation of a successful attack, obviously there are consequences, some of which include reputational damage, loss of business from existing customers, or potential fines, or at worst, trading sanctions from the federal government. Now, one of the main ways to protect client data is to ensure that your firm has the right policies and the right procedures in place. Having policies that cover the acceptable use of IT systems, how to safely handle sensitive data, and staff requirements of what they can and can't do in relation to working remotely, all form part of a risk reduction activity. Now, you might have your own policies in place and your own procedures in place, but if your suppliers don't, or other people you transact with don't, then that obviously increases the firm's risk of a cyber attack as well. It's important to evaluate before engaging with third parties. Government agencies are increasingly requiring suppliers, partners, and vendors to become accredited in information security standards such as ISO 27001 before they'll continue to do business with them. This is currently rolling out for the Department of Education, Skills and Employment, and I predict this is going to become more widespread as information security becomes more and more important to everyone, both professionally and personally. Legalities are all your forte, but it's important to understand your legal obligations around protecting client data, as well as the legal requirements of reporting breaches under the notifiable data breach scheme. It's very important to make sure that you have a functional data breach response plan that has been tested.
Okay, so, well, Glendin, from what we've seen so far, cyber attacks are now a foreseeable reality for any organisation, including law firms. What are the first steps the firm should take if they are in fact breached or attacked?
Look, Sam, the most important thing a firm can do is to know what to do and how to act quickly. The more time a system is compromised or a fake email trail is carrying on, the worse the damage can be. That's why having a robust disaster recovery plan that includes a data breach response plan is key. This will help firms take action faster, communicate more appropriately with stakeholders, avoid making costly mistakes, and more importantly, reduce the stress for those involved. In most cases, the information captured during the recovery process will be a prerequisite for making a cyber claim, insurance claim and reporting the incident. Now, the important point to make is often our ability to make the right decisions in a crisis situation is hampered. This, coupled with maintaining accurate records on the incident and the activities and decisions made during the recovery, often mean that ill-prepared firms pay a higher price during and after the event. This might include longer downtime, inadequate communications to clients, or failure to properly explain an incident to an insurer or an investigator.
Okay, great. So far we've talked about the requirements around protecting client data and responding to breaches. Are there other areas that firms should be addressing to remain protected?
Absolutely. Technology safety is another important area of cybersecurity, and it's often overlooked by law firms because it's either too complicated or assumed that their IT team will take care of it. Some things to consider, perhaps align your cybersecurity framework with a standard. Many of you will be familiar with the Essential 8 standard, or in some cases NIST, or as I said before, ISO 27001. These are all recognized standards that focus on protecting sensitive data. Make sure you have the right technologies in place, technologies that are fit for purpose, properly maintained and monitored. There's no point implementing these defenses if there isn't someone to monitor them and respond to them, such as your internal IT team or an external provider. And consider a security audit by an independent provider. One way to approach this is to get a cyber posture audit to ascertain your firm's risk.
Okay, great. So now we have the technology secure. What about the cyber culture around the office? So reports indicate that 38% of cyber-related incidents are due to human error. Can you give us some insights on how firms can protect themselves in this area?
Look, as a business leader in any firm, it's important to understand the risk that your staff pose to the organisation. The posture audit I spoke about earlier should include a risk assessment of your staff, both in their cyber competency and their culture. Don't assume competency. Due to the nature of the threats, you can't afford to assume your staff are capable of identifying and managing all of these threats. And don't forget, businesses are obliged to provide their staff with some level of training. It's the same with work health and safety. This is a key component of reducing cyber risk. And once is not enough, make it a part of your risk management framework and repeat.
Yeah, repeat. I like it. I guess with the ever-changing landscape, we can't just set and forget. So, Melissa, your firm has undergone some cyber awareness training in the last year. Could you walk us through why you sought this out, and secondly, how this has helped you in your role as well as your firm overall?
Sure, thanks, Sam. So as the operations manager at Turnbull Hill, I oversee the IT internally. Diamond look after our infrastructure and our servers, but I look after the internal help desk. I come from a law background. I've been in law since I was 16 years old, primarily as a paralegal and then moving on into project work and now as operations manager. So my background, well, I guess my professional background is in IT. I've certainly learned a lot over the last 7 years, but without that professional background, I just felt that we needed some professional assistance with our training. We definitely held internal presentations prior to engaging Diamond. We showed a video that Martin Thurgate prepared a few years ago, I think now, giving tips and tricks on things to look out for in emails and things like that. We provided that to all staff. We did it as part of our induction, but I just felt like it wasn't enough, and I felt the pressure to keep on educating staff because, as Glendin said earlier, they are our first line of defence, and I really wanted to make sure that they understood that it's not just IT's job to look after cybersecurity at the office. So we, due to the ever-changing landscape and the risk involved, we sought professional advice from Diamond. So our experience with that has been, initially we started with a presentation. Glendin came out to our office and did about an hour presentation to all of our staff, bringing everyone up to speed on the things that they needed to look out for. Glendin then created a monthly schedule of training for us, and also some fake phishing attacks as well. So part of the fake phishing attack setup was also setting up a phishing button in Outlook, which allows staff to click on that and let Diamond know if they have any concerns about some suspicious looking emails. Glendin's been able to work closely with us, keeping the schedule, timing and subject matter relevant to keep staff engaged. So we've found that the timing is pretty important. Anything longer than 5 to 10 minutes and we start to lose engagement. So Glendin's been great in taking that feedback and tailoring it to what we needed. The monthly reports that we get given as well also provide a really good snapshot of how we're travelling as a firm in terms of our cybersecurity. It highlights areas of concern. It lets us know whether people are engaged in the training, actually undertaking it or not getting to it, so that we can have conversations with staff about that. We did find that after introducing the phishing button, we started getting a lot of reports with suspicious emails, and that's great because we've obviously got everyone engaged and got everyone thinking, but it started to overwhelm our internal help desk a little bit. So I put together a mind map which just outlined to staff the steps that they could personally take themselves prior to contacting the help desk, and just to really empower them to start to, I guess, believe that they have the skills to identify risk. One of the ones in particular that I think that they can look after is if they've got an email from someone that they do know, but there's something suspicious in the email, just giving that person a call and saying, hey, I've got this email from you. It's got a link to OneDrive or something like that. I'm just double checking it's from you and it's okay to click on it. And I think people are very understanding now of us being a little bit more cautious in that area. So that just
definitely it makes you look responsible as well, which is great.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And we've actually helped other people identify when they've been breached. Sometimes emails come through from even other law firms that have been impersonated, and then we've been able to let them know, and they've gone, oh, okay, yep, you're now the third person that's rung me. Obviously something's going on.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
Great.
So I guess to summarise how the training has helped us in relation to the fake phishing attacks, I think we have had a few staff click on those, and although we haven't had any actual breaches, those phishing attacks have tricked a few people, and it only happens once. And the training actually tells them where they went wrong, and it means that it all happens quite privately too. We don't have to run around and say, hey, you clicked on this. They just get the feedback from the system saying this is where you went wrong and what to look out for in the future. So I think that's been really helpful. And also, I think the main thing is just the training has kept cybersecurity just front of mind to everybody. It's just a constant reminder that we expect everyone to be on top of their game in terms of keeping us and our clients safe.
Fantastic. Thank you, Melissa. It's a really admirable and necessary attitude these days for any business to project for the staff and their clients. So it's so great to hear. So Robyn, just to round out today's topic, how can cyber insurance add an additional layer of protection these days? So we do get a lot of questions from our customers around this topic. Could you please walk us through how they can navigate making the most out of insurance in this time?
Yeah, sure. Cyber insurance is kind of like the end of the line to everything else that Glendin and Melissa have said. And I think back to your point, you know, recently that said, are people still not thinking it will happen to them? I think there's a certain level when Melissa says, you know, she's a lawyer, not an IT person. I'm an insurance broker. I'm not an IT person. However, there are there's jargon that you need to understand that go to the very core baseline now of how to have good cybersecurity posture. And as Glendin says, there's risk management frameworks that the government has recommended. And in those essential 8 components of a good risk management cybersecurity framework, there are very achievable goals, which are now, again, what I would suggest a baseline because of the rampant attacks across the world. And the OAIC, which is the Australian statistics, say 38% of claims arise from human event. It's actually 85% globally. And so the whole concept of education and training is so important. And so insurance is there as a 24/7 crisis hotline response to anybody that needs it. And so the policy covers anything that is even suspected. And so most of our clients, again, deer in headlights, ring up and go, we don't know what to do. So if you've got an insurance policy, what you have is an incident response that should be built into your business continuity and disaster recovery, so you know exactly what to do if it happens to you. And then you have what's a breach coach. And so a breach coach is generally a law firm because they're there to manage the whole event from beginning to end and have to protect you around your legal responsibility to report through the Privacy Commissioner to determine the severity of the private information that might have been breached. They then have a vendor panel where they bring in forensics that would work with collaboratively with whatever IT service provider you have if they're experienced in this kind of event. They will bring a criminal negotiator if you are being held to ransom to assist in the reduction of that ransom if you have to pay it, while there's a lot of quick going on in the background around, you know, can we back up? Are we able to back up? Or do we need to pay the ransom in order to get our business going? And you look at the huge recent attacks like JBS and CNA Insurance, like CNA was $40 million over in America, US dollars, and JBS paid $11 million because they were just not in a position to keep going throughout the world with their services. So the insurance policy, I've never seen anything broader in insurance. It's still broad. It's getting to a point where if you're not at a baseline level of security, then potentially you're going to have exclusions now in your policy because everyone is saying if you understand you have vulnerabilities and you're actually not doing anything about it, like understanding your patching cadence, you know, putting band-aids on your Microsoft vulnerabilities, having multi-factor authentication, backup processes, all the things that Glendin talked about, then insurance companies can't continue to pay the sort of levels of, cost they're paying across the world when they are known weaknesses within cybersecurity frameworks. So, but having said that, the policies right now are incredibly broad and are there to protect you from, as I say, beginning to end. So forensically, you know, you found the problem, you've isolated the problem, you've remediated the problem, and the problem's over and you're back to business as usual. And it also covers your revenue for your tools down business interruption.
Okay, that sounds great. Very reassuring as well. What I'm going to do actually at this point is wrap up now. We are kind of very tight for time. We did have a couple of questions to address, and we did have some provided prior to the event. So as I mentioned, we do have a couple of questions to address. This first one actually is from Melissa. So Melissa, if you'd like to maybe ask this question in your own words, it's a great segue actually from what Robyn has just been discussing with us.
Sure. So insurance seems great for expensive cybercrime attacks where perhaps bank account details were compromised and a large sum of money was put into the wrong account. But can you explain the value for attacks that may only require backup restoration at a minimal cost?
Well, the challenge is, Melissa, that the claims are changing every day. And so it may be minimal cost right now, but you don't know what the next attack is coming and what it's going to cost. And generally, the claims go over the $50,000 mark. You know, sort of average ransomware claims are now between $1 and $3 million. And you've just got your restoration costs that can cost anything over all your first party costs can go up to anything between $50,000 to $100,000 just to remediate problems. And so it's just challenging. It's great if there's a small event that can shut down without a lot of cost, but unfortunately what we're seeing is increased costs associated with every event.
You made a point earlier as well that I found really interesting about not only data being encrypted but also being stolen, and then people having to be in a position of paying the ransomware, which we obviously avoided in our attack initially. So I guess having protection in that scenario would be very helpful as well.
Yeah, I think the challenging thing is the sophistication of frequency across the world is the problem and the challenge for all governments now. And you would have seen the Labor position yesterday in government saying they put forward a bill that says every ransomware attack should be reported so that we can actually trace criminals, trace Bitcoin wallets, all those sorts of things. But unfortunately, they're not including the businesses that have revenue under $10 million. And when you look at law firms, that's 87% of the business.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah.
That's an interesting it's really hard because no one really knows exactly what to do to stop this problem, and everyone's trying to do their best.
And we do actually have a question about what the government is doing for small businesses. But before we move to that, we do have another one to round out insurance. This one is about law cover. So it did come in from a firm that had asked a question about how, is this enough for them? So they are currently being covered under the policy. Is this enough for their firm?
Yeah, so from what I know, and I haven't done an absolute deep dive into the technicality of the policy, which I will and can report back on that. But essentially, I know that everyone has a $50,000 cover. It appears to be a comprehensive first and third party cover. I'm not sure if it covers social engineering. However, $50,000, I wouldn't deal with a client without recommending $1 million worth of cover right now in this current environment, only because we are seeing these claims every day and the costs escalating every day. And the privacy regime is now under scrutiny because now they don't believe in Australia that we have enough cost associated with punitive behaviour in terms of, if you haven't done the right thing by your cybersecurity, then the penalties should actually be higher than what they actually are now. So even under the policy, you're covered for fines and penalties, you're covered for the regulatory investigation, and it covers all those things. So it's very broad cover. Plus business interruption, if you're down for one day, 24 hours, all tools down, what does that actually cost your business? And exactly. So that's covering it off as well in insurance. So I just don't think $50,000 would cover anything at this point in what I've seen in claims.
Okay, great. And I think just to circle back, there are cyber insurance organisations that do have, and I think you guys as well, a checklist available for organisations to actually run through and just get a gauge of feel for how protected they are or what their premiums would be and what they need to adjust or change in their behaviour for those premiums to work for them even better.
Yeah. So proposal forms offer, it's almost like a risk management tool, proposal forms, but what is happening again in insurance is that they're going to put exclusions in if you don't address these simple things of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right. Well,
changing.
Yeah. Thanks, Robyn. One more question. It was quite a long question, so I'm just going to summarise it here. What is the government doing to protect small businesses from cybersecurity threats? You did touch upon that a little bit earlier. If you just had a few more insights in that area, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the government's trying their best. They've got the Australian Cybersecurity Strategy they brought out in 2020. they're putting a lot of focus on critical infrastructure. They will impose their own security regime. They'll take over security breaches for critical infrastructure if they need to. They've expanded the sector from 4 to 11. And then what we're going to see is, as I said before, the supply chain into all of those essential services and critical infrastructure will also have to follow the same, cybersecurity regime. I think there's a period of time where everyone's been on a journey, but now the government is expecting everyone to be kind of at that destination if they want to deal into government contracts and if they want to deal into essential services and critical infrastructure. We've seen it with APRA as well, imposing security regime around all financial service companies, and it's just going to continue. And just from the small business point of view, there are resources at cyber.gov.au. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre has a lot of resources that, people can go and learn about, see all the stats and that sort of thing. But I just think there's still a certain amount of ostrich kind of behaviour about, I don't really know what to do. So,
Great.
and that's got to change, really.
It does indeed. Thank you, Robyn. So, look, as I mentioned earlier, 45 minutes is definitely not enough time to cover this diverse and important topic. But firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to Glendin, Robyn and Melissa for your time and your insights today. They've given everybody a lot to think about, no doubt. Secondly, to the audience, if you do have any further questions for our experts, please do send them through to the team and we'll have them answered for you. So on that note, I hope that the resources that you would have received prior to the event were valuable, and our team will be following up with you over the coming days with just to help you with any questions you may have and with the recording of this webinar. So for more information on anything that Diamond may have discussed today, just pop over to our website. But again, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.